Nobody fighting and no one killed. Everybody loving and always will. No strife, no storm, no animosity. Like paradise, it will always be. A woman, a man, that make happiness grow, standing hand in hand, as it was in Eden, new life revealing. My heart is pleading for long ago.
How terribly strange to be in your 60s. It's the age when all the clichés become true. You can't remember your brother's birthday, but you can clearly remember what he said to you when you were 12. You do think that when you were young, people had happier lives and were more respectful to their elders. You do think the pop music was more musical, more rocky, more better. You do remember strange amounts of money like 17 and 9 halfpenny. It doesn't occur to you that people might not be interested in the fact that Levi jeans cost 19 and 11 when they first came out, and beer was only 1 and a penny a pint when you started drinking. So I don't know whether these stories I'm going to tell you are true, or whether they actually happened, what age I was, or even if I was there. It's just how I remember it. Whiteo! Whiteo! The giant gorilla beating on my window pane faded, and I opened my eyes. I could feel the sun streaming through the bedroom window, spreading over my face, and I could hear the sound of workmen laughing in the town yard opposite my bedroom. Whiteo! I realized it was Lewis, my best friend, shouting from the street. I clambered out of bed, naked, and sleepily padded into my parents' bedroom, ignoring the ginger cat that mewed and snaked in between my legs. As I opened the bedroom door, the comforting smell of urine and tobacco smoke reminded me that my father had come in drunk last night from a meeting of the British Legion, complaining loudly that the committee had no respect for procedure. I had no idea what procedure was, but whatever it was, the committee never had any respect for it, according to my father. I walked past the unmade, empty bed, climbed onto the windowsill, and opening the window, looked out onto Lewis's white-haired, upturned face. Hey, Whiteo! Let's go out Pendeen. Johnny Sowden says there's a wreck. He says there's oranges and plums on board and perhaps some gold. The street was white and warm and quiet. At the bottom of the street I could see most of the gang. Professor Johnny Sowden was there, gesticulating and dancing in the middle of the road. He was singing the marching chorus from the Desert Song, a film we had all seen at the Savoy the previous week. There's a place beneath the sun for all. Johnny was miming riding a horse, his right hand holding imaginary reins and his left hand patting his bum. His hair flamed all over his face. I remembered a time last winter at the Pirates rugby ground when Johnny was standing behind me and started feeling my bum. I had laughed and turned around to face him, and I was shocked when I noticed how serious Johnny had looked. I made sure I was never alone with Johnny since then. Bobby, Johnny's younger brother, was sitting on the curb, whittling a piece of wood. Michael and David Wallace were stringing bows, Big Boogie and Little Boogie. I've never been sure why they were nicknamed Big Boogie and Little Boogie. Something to do with Michael playing a game called Boogiana Fitz. My heart sank when I saw my cousin Maxie, speeding down the street on his homemade bike. He had put the frame of an old bike onto small pram wheels and he propelled it by pushing on the ground with his feet, except when he just freewheeled down the hill like he was doing now, scattering everything in sight and stopping by throwing himself onto the pavement or onto any of the gang who were in the proximity. If Max was going to see the wreck, he was sure to make my life hell, calling me Mummy's boy or asking me to spell accommodation. He was 2 years older than I was, and he had picked on me constantly ever since I could remember. Once, when I was 8, he had come into the church hall where I was at a scouts' night, had taken me out and tied me to a tree in Penrose Gardens, where I had remained until after pub closing time, when a drunk untied me after he had peed all over me in the dark. When I got home, I had a walloping from my dad for staying out too long and wasn't allowed out for a week. I suppose I could have told him what had happened, but you never squealed on one of the gang. "Johnny says the wreck is all smashed up on the rocks, and everything is on the beach for the picking. Let's go see what we can plunder." Plunder? I suddenly wondered if Max had tied a lamp to the tail of a cow to lure the boat onto the rocks like they used to in the olden days. I wouldn't put it past him. "I'll be down in a minute." I put on my trousers that were lying on the floor where I had stepped out of them, pulled a jumper over my head, put on my daps, went down the lino-covered stairs, and walked through the living room to the back kitchen where I found a note from my mother anchored on the table with a shilling piece. "Here's money for your dinner. Don't spend it on sweets. Love, Mum." My father had written underneath, "Don't make a mess." I screwed up my eyes in rage and screwed up the note. "Bugger you! I'll make a bloody mess if I sodding well want to." I mixed up some cocoa and sugar and poured on some cold milk. I then cut a couple of slices of bread, found the secret place where my mum had hidden the best butter, spread it on the slices, and then smeared them with strawberry jam, slapped them together, and put them in a paper bag I found in the drawer of the table, pocketed the shilling piece that my mum had left, and went into the front passage. My Hercules bike was propped against the front room wall. On the saddle was a note from my father. "This bike needs cleaning." "Oh, shut your bloody mouth!" I screamed, hoping he would hear me down the station where he was cleaning carriages. I put the sandwiches in my saddlebag and pushed the bike out the front door. The gang, by this time, had graduated up the street and were waiting in the road outside my front door. "Here's Big Ed bloody White-O with his bloody posh bike. I'll give you a race any time you like, White-O, 'cause you're too bloody fat to win anything. Bloody mammy's boy. Hey, White-O, spell accommodation." A-C-O-M-M-U. Look at him. Goes to bloody grammar school and can't even spell accommodation. Bloody ignorant Big Ed. He reached forward and gave me a painful deadener on the arm. I could see the scabs on his arm where he had carved his initials M.B. with a blunt, dirty penknife. Max stared at the gang, sullenly, as if daring any of us to challenge him. "Anyhow," he said, "I'm going out Pendee with my Uncle Theo. Anyone want to come?" Nobody said a word. "Well, bloody bugger you lot. I'll go on my own and keep the money I'll get for the scrap from off the wreck. And if you wait for bloody Big Ed White-O on his bloody heap of a bike, you'll never get there. I'm going in Theo's lorry, probably. So bloody bugger you lot." He jumped on his homemade bike and sped down the street. "Bloody hell," said Bobby Sowden. "I bet he's going about 200 miles an hour." We watched as Max hurtled around the corner at the bottom of the street and disappeared from sight. Shortly after, we heard a woman's voice yelling, "You mad heathen, Maxie Barrett! You nearly killed me!" We sat down on the warm pavement to discuss transport arrangements. "Who's going with who, then?" said Lewis. "Bobby, you come on my crossbar. ordered Professor Johnny Sowden. My brother can come on mine, said Big Wally. Lewis and I had bikes of our own, and so we went to Pendeen to see the wreck. I didn't really want to go. Later, looking down on that broken toy tossed on curls of cotton wool, my saddlebag stuffed with jam sandwiches and a bottle of dandelion and burdock in my hand, I was glad I came.
Are the stars out tonight? I don't know if it's cloudy or bright, 'cause I only have...
Do you know what the stars are, Whiteo? We were sitting on the doorstep of my house, number 40, looking up at the clear night sky. Eh? Lewis looked at me, then looked back at the sky. The stars, you know. You know what they are? Well, I don't know. Rock and stuff, I suppose. You know, mud and that. Mr. Evans, up school, said a star is a dead body. That's daft, said Slogs. If it was a dead body, you wouldn't be able to see it from down here. It's too far away. Perhaps there's lots of dead bodies all mashed up together like, said Bobby, who was whittling on a piece of wood. Perhaps there's, you know, hundreds of dead bodies all smashed up and lying on top of each other. Well, that's daft. Where'd they all come from? Well, from down here, 'cause they're dead. Perhaps that's what happens to people when they die. Slogs looked at me, looked at Lewis, looked back at the sky, and kicked a tin can down the street, unable to answer the irrefutable logic of Bobby's thesis. Yeah. Bobby, taking advantage of the lack of alternative theories, started developing his theme. You know, when you think of it, well, that's why there are hundreds of, you know, stars like. 'Cause when you think of all the people who have died, like, since the whole world started, like, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds, and if they all lied on top of each other, you know, their dead bodies, like, it would take up all the room in the sky, so they got to split up when they get to 100 bodies or something, and that's why there are so many stars. The immensity of the argument silenced us. Bobby continued whittling his wood. Me and Lewis sat on the step in silence, and Slogs took another kick at the tin can and said, Anyhow, who wants to go camping? Haven't got a tent. I have. My dad got one on house clearance. Slog's father had a second-hand shop at the end of Belgravia Street. He said I could have it. He said it's like new. How many can sleep in it? Asked Lewis. Stacks. It's probably an army tent or something. Where shall we camp? Trevailer. Nah. Foxwoods? Nah. Let's go Prussia Cove, said Bobby. Yeah! Bobby whittled his wood. Me and Lewis looked at the stars. Slogs gave the tin can another kick and said, How are we going to get there? Well, let's walk, said Lewis. Guess on with his miles, said Slogs. We could hitchhike, I suggested. Nah, you never get a car going along Resudgeon Road. And anyway, Dirty Dick might pick us up, and then it would take us ages to get there because he'd want us in the back. We'd have some money off him, though, said Slogs. Yeah, said Bobby, but we don't want no money, 'cause we're going to be living wild for weeks. We're going to be eating potatoes and carrots and cabbages and that, and killing rabbits and mackerel and things. I don't like cabbage, said Slogs. I don't like mackerel, I joined in. Bobby looked pensive. My ma says you got to boil mackerel in cold water. That's daft, said Slogs. How can you boil something in cold water? Dunno, but that's what my ma does. How long we going for? I asked. Weeks, said Bobby, maybe months. We could live there for years and nobody would know where we were and we wouldn't have to go to school or nothing. Money would come in handy if we wanted chips, though, and if we wanted to come into town and go pictures and that. Slogs liked going to the films. Let's get out there first, said Lewis. I vote we go by bus. It's only about a tanner or something, and I got 10pence on me now. I got a tanner, I said. I haven't got nothing, said Bobby. Slogs guiltily admitted, I got 2 bob. Slogs always had more money than the rest of us, and he was usually willing to share it because he wasn't really in the gang, and was anxious to secure his position. Right, that's it, said Lewis. We all get some food and that, and plates and things, and then we catch the bus to that place where you turn down to Prussia Cove, and then we walk to a field just above Betsy's Cove, and we camp there. How do you know all that? I asked him. Dunno. Just do. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my mother back from her whist drive at the Women's British Legion. Hello, boys. Come on, you better clear off the step before Mr. White comes home, 'cause you know how he goes on about you cluttering up the step. My mother and father had come down to Cornwall from Wales on a holiday in the 1930s and had forgotten to go back. She was smiling, and I could smell her scent of Californian poppies. Can I go camping tomorrow, Ma? Well, I don't know. Where are you going? Prussia Cove. It's not far, and Louis and Bobby and Slogs are going. Can I go, Ma? Hey, can I? Well, how are you going to get there? By bus. How much is the fare? I looked at Lewis. About 1 and 3, I think. All right, then. Look, dipping into her purse. Here's 1 and 6, but don't tell your father I gave it to you. You know how he goes on. Oh, thanks, Ma. Now come on, it's time for your bed. It's gone 10. All right, Ma. I'll be in a minute. My mother opened the door and went inside, leaving the front door open. I looked at the boys. Yeah, 1 and 6. Anyhow, said Slogs, I'm going home now. I'll see you tomorrow. See ya. He walked away up from us up the hill towards Rosine Road. We watched him until he got to the top of the street. Hey, Slogs! Here! Shouted Bobby, waving his hand to indicate Slogs should come back. We waited until he came back to us. What? Just wanted to know how far you would have got if I didn't call you back. The 3 of us collapsed laughing. Bastard. I knew you was going to do that. Well, what you come back for then? Said Bobby. Yeah, see you, Slogs, I said, feeling sorry for him. See you tomorrow. Don't forget the tent and food and plates and that. See you, Slogs. See you, Slogs, said Lewis. See you, Louis. See you, Slogs. See you, Bobby. See you, Slogs. See you, Whiteo. We watched him until he got to the top of the street. Hey, Slogs! What? Here. Piss off, said Slogs, and disappeared around the corner. I'm going in now, said Lewis. See you, Dave. See you, Bob. Yeah, see you, Louis. See you, Whiteo. Yeah, see you, Bob. See you, Lou. I waited until Lewis reached his house. Hey, Lou. Yeah? Here. Bugger off, said Lewis, and we went to bed. The next day we went camping, but that's another story.
See the pyramids along the Nile, and watch the sunrise on a tropic isle. But just
I woke up full of enthusiasm. Camping out Prussia Cove? Yeah! After a breakfast of bread and milk, I started to get everything ready. What would I need? Something to eat. I looked in the cupboard. Yeah! Tin of baked beans. What else? Camp coffee? No. Tea? Yeah! I grabbed a handful of tea leaves from the caddy and then looked around for something to put it in. Opening the drawer to the table with my other hand, I pulled out a paper bag and poured the tea in. Cocoa? Yeah! Neither my mum or dad drank it, so I took the tin. Then I saw a note from my mother on the kitchen table. Have a good time camping. Take the bread and butter on the table, and there are sausages in the safe that you can have. Don't forget to wrap up warm and take a blanket from your bed. Love, Mum. Underneath, my father had written, "Behave yourself and don't make a mess." I felt so excited that even my father's terse instructions couldn't make me annoyed. I went out into the backyard and opened the gauze-fronted wooden cupboard hanging in the corner on the wall. This was the safe, where my mum kept everything cool. I took out a packet of sausages wrapped in brown greaseproof paper. Back in the kitchen, I methodically went through what I would need for an unlimited spell of survival in the country. Bread, butter, tea, cocoa, sausages, and baked beans. Yep, that's about it. I went upstairs and pulled a grey blanket from my bed to wrap everything in. Perhaps I could tie everything in a bundle on the end of a stick like Tom Sawyer in the Classics Illustrated comics. But I didn't have a stick, and my bow was too bendy to look right. Lewis came into the house, shouting up the stairs, "White-O! Wake up! I'm out here!" I shouted back. "You're up early," he said, as he came in carrying a wooden orange box full of food and pots and plates. "I forgot plates and stuff," I said, "but I got plenty of grub. My ma gave me some sausages." "Great! I got 2 loaves of bread and cheese and a bag of apples and some plums and a jar of jam and everything." "I don't like cheese," I said. "Bobby's sitting on the step. He's got some potatoes." "We're all set then," I said, picking up my blanket-wrapped parcel of food. "Let's go." "Well, Slogs ain't here yet," Lewis said, "but we can wait for him on the step." We waited on the step all morning, until my father came home for his dinner at 12 o'clock. "Come on, you lot, off the step. How you always got to sit on our step? Why can't you sit on your own?" "The sun always shines on your step, Mr. White," said Bobby. "Your mother said you were going camping out Sennan Cove," my father accused me. "Prussia Cove," I replied sullenly, "waiting for Slogs." "We'll wait on someone else's step. Can't even get into my own house, yeah?" As he clambered over us, I could smell the mixture of oil waste and tobacco, and when he was safely indoors, I stood up and raised 2 fingers of each hand after him. "Die?" Oh shit, he had seen me. "What?" "Come in here, now." I went into the house and saw my father standing in the back kitchen with his hands on his hips. "What's this tea doing on the floor?" I felt like saying, "I think it's the tango," but I didn't want to risk being stopped going camping, so I remained silent. "Think I got nothing better to do than clean up after you? Go on, get out of here, you make me sick. And sit on someone else's step," he shouted after me.
So tired of waiting for you, so tired of longing.
Lewis, Bobby and I sat on the front doorstep until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when we heard a clanking coming from the top of the street. Around the corner came Slogs with a huge knapsack on his back, and pans hanging from it, clanking with every step he took. In one hand he was carrying a cloth tool bag stuffed to the top with paper bags, and in the other a khaki army kit bag with more pots sticking precariously at the top. He was pink-faced and sweating. "Louis, give us a hand here. Hey, Bobby." We waited until he reached us sitting on the step. "Someone's going to have to give me a hand with this lot," he puffed. We eventually reached Prussia Cove as the sun was setting. Slogs had to stop 3 times on the way to the bus stop saying, "Here, White-O, give us a hand here," or, "Hey, Bobby, carry this kit bag for a bit." He got into an argument with the bus conductor when he dumped his blanket full of pots in the aisle, knocked a woman's hat off as he sat down, and paid the fare for the 4 of us on the promise of being paid back later. The mile walk from the bus stop at the other end to Prussia Cove took us over 2 hours, as it was interrupted by a fist fight between Bobby and Slogs, because Bobby had discovered a bag of apples in Slogs' tool bag and had eaten 3 before Slogs found out. The fight finished when they both rolled in a cowpat in the middle of the road. "You shouldn't have ate they apples anyhow. They were going to be for a midnight feast tonight," he complained. "Well, that's no cause for you," said Bobby. "White-O's got sausages," was Lewis's pragmatic and conciliatory reply. On arrival at the field, we disembarked and prepared to make camp. The tent was huge, big enough to sleep about 10 men, but there was a huge hole in one end of the roof. We then discovered that there weren't any tent pegs, and had to break branches off trees to serve as pegs and anchor them down with the biggest rocks we could find in the hedges. "Shouldn't there be a ground sheet, Slogs?" asked Lewis. "What's that?" asked Bobby. "A sheet that lies across the ground," said Lewis. "No, not on this one," explained Slogs. "This is the type where you put blankets down and sleep on they." "I only brought 1 blanket." "I didn't bring any," said Bobby. "I got 4, said Slogs. After about an hour and a half construction work, we stepped back to admire the edifice. "Sags a bit in the middle," I said. "Well, that don't matter." "Shouldn't it be a bit higher, Slogs?" "No, not this one. This is the type where you crouch down to get in." "What we going to do about that get-all?" "Sleep up the other end," said Slogs. "Hey, White-O, let's have they sausages. I'm starving." "How we going to cook 'em?" "Well, didn't your ma cook 'em?" "No." "Let's eat them raw," said Bobby. "I'm starving." "Nah, let's start a fire and roast 'em, and put some potatoes in and roast they," suggested Lewis. "I got a frying pan," said Slogs. "And I got a kettle to make a cup of tea in," said Bobby. "Yeah!" Later, after a sumptuous repast of half-burnt, half-pink sausages, black scorched, rock-solid hot potatoes, and huge chunks of bread grabbed with our hands because no one had brought a knife, we gathered round the fire. "Hey, let's tell ghost stories, yeah," said Lewis. "Yeah, go on, Louis, you start." "I don't know any." "Go on, White-O, you start." You got to see this, gypsy woman, and she got to be like a werewolf, and you got to see this big castle, like, and there's this prince." "Is he shagging the gypsy?" laughed Bobby. "Yeah, I suppose so. Anyhow, you got to see this tunnel." "Is that where he shags the gypsy?" said Bobby again. "Yeah," said Slogs, "and every time he shag her, she turns into this werewolf, yeah." Bobby and Slogs rolled around laughing. Lewis nudged me encouragingly. "Go on, White-O, that was good." "Nah, don't feel like it now." "I got one," said Bobby. "You got to see this invisible man come in the room." "That's daft," said Slogs. "Shut up, Slogs. Go on, Bob." "Anyhow, you got to see this invisible man come into the room." "That's daft, that is." "How can you see an invisible man?" "'Cause it's a story," said Bobby. "Yeah, well, you shouldn't have pinched my apples anyhow." "Yeah, well, you should have a proper tent, not this stupid pile of junk." "Yeah, well, you didn't even bring a blanket." "Yeah, well, you ain't even in the gang." "I'm warning you," said Slogs. "I'm getting mad, and when I get mad, I do mad things. Like this here." He jumped up, picked the kettle from off the fire, ran to the end of the field and threw the kettle high into the air and over the cliff edge. Seconds later, we could hear it clatter on the rocks below. He walked back to the tent, looking slightly apologetic. "See? That was my ma's kettle," said Bobby. "She didn't know I took it." We sat around the fire silently. I don't remember much more. We spent the night in the tent, shivering with the cold and damp, and we went home in the morning. And I didn't go camping again for 30 years, and hated it as much then as I did all those years ago with Lewis, Bobby, and Slogs.
Now down in the meadow in a little fishy pool lives 3 little fishes and a mama fishy too. Now swim, said the mama fishy, swim if you can.
Let's go up Trevaler. Nah. Let's go down the pool. Let's go out to Foxwoods, eh? Nah. Let's stay here in the cool. Well, you're a poet and you don't know it. We were sitting on the step outside my house. Lewis, Bobby, Whippet, whose real name was Clarence, his brother Goblin, who used to be called Baldnut because the American GIs had shaved his hair off during the war, but whose real name was Cyril, Wally, who was a really good swimmer because he had webbed feet, his brother Big Wally, and me. It was a scorching hot summer day round about noon, and we were spread-eagled over the step and on the pavement. I knew my dad would be home for his dinner soon and would embarrass me by moaning about not being able to get into his own house, and why couldn't they sit on someone else's step. But number 40 was a sun trap. We all knew that. "Why don't we go out Black Rock and build a raft?" I said. "Yeah," said Bobby, "and we could sail to the Scillies or even Africa." "Don't be daft," said Big Wally. "That would take weeks. And we'd have to take food and that, and it might rain, and we would have storms and everything." "I'm not scared of a bit of rain," said Bobby, "even if you are." "You better watch it, Soudix," said Big Wally, catching hold of Bobby by the collar of his shirt, "'cause I might give you a Boogiana fit." A Boogiana fit involved Big Wally yelling and cavorting around and inflicting various tortures like deadness or Chinese burns to his victim. This is why Big Wally was sometimes called Big Boogie, and his brother David was called Little Boogie. But today they were called Wally and Big Wally. "Come on," said Lewis, "let's get our cozies and go out Black Rock." "Yeah," said Whippet, "we might see Dirty Dick and get some money." "I'd rather build a raft," shouted Bobby. "Come on, gang, let's go." He jumped to his feet and started to sing the marching chorus from the desert song. "There's a place beneath the sun for all." As he was dancing in the middle of the road, we looked to the top of the street and saw Ivor, the boss of the gang, Johnny Nick and his brother Jimmy, strolling down towards us. Johnny Nick was a bit of a hero to me and Lewis, because he looked like Johnny Weismiller, and he was the best swimmer in the gang. But Ivor was our leader, 4 years older, our hero, our icon. If he had told any one of us to throw ourselves in front of a rarely seen car, we would have done it without hesitation. The sun was shining behind him, and it made his black hair shine. He was eating an apple, and his shirt sleeves were rolled high over his sun-bronzed arms, and I thought he was the handsomest human being I'd seen in all my 7 years on this earth. He was my god. "You!" he shouted to us. "Hey, Ive, can I have the core?" pleaded Bobby. "Can I have it, Ive? Oh, Ive, give us the core, eh?" We all begged him for the remains of his apple, not because we desired the precious little fruit that was left, but because it would bestow an honour on us. We would be part of Ivor's coterie, his inner sanctum. "Nah, gonna give it to Louis," said our leader. It was only years later that I discovered that Lewis's mum always gave Ivor a bag of apples so that he would look after her son. "Where you going, Ive?" said Big Wally. "Down the harbour for a swim," said our leader. "Yeah, so are we all chorused. I didn't think it prudent to remind them about Black Rock. Yeah, but we're not going to number 7 steps. We're going to number 10, said Ivor. Yeah, great, said Goblin, 'cause then we could look in the mortuary. Yeah, and we might see some dead bodies. I seed a dead German laid out in there once, lied Jimmy Nick. Yeah, I seed a German pilot, shouted Wally, 'cause he had an helmet on and everything, and there was blood all over his face, and he only had one leg, and his arm was all mashed up, and there was blood everywhere. The assumed mortuary was a shed that bordered the railway sidings near the quay. You had to climb up on the sea wall and precariously balance on tiptoe, with the sea about 20 feet below you, to look through a grille about 3 inches wide. I could never see anything through it, but it did smell pretty bad. You little liard, shouted Wally's brother. You couldn't have seen all that through that little hole? I bloody did, didn't I, Whiteo? He punched me on the arm to get confirmation. Yeah, I remember. We all saw it, didn't we, Lou? Yeah, confirmed Lewis. There was a bit of his plane in there too. Lewis looked at me to see if he had gone too far. Bobby broke the silence. We going down harbour or what? Yeah, we are, laughed Big Wally. But I dunno what you're going to do, Bob, 'cause you can't even swim. I can swim if I want to, shouted Bobby, who was the youngest of us. I just don't want to. Yeah, come on, gang, let's go, shouted Wally. There's a place beneath the sun for all. And so we all went down to number 10 steps, and we all jumped in or dived in if we knew how, and we all swam and laughed and splashed and swam underwater, and Bobby stood shivering on the steps watching us, his cosy cut down from one of his old jumpers hanging loosely about his legs. Then, without warning, he stood on the edge of the step, gave out a Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan yell, and jumped into the harbour with us, and came up spluttering and laughing and spitting out water and crying, See, I can swim! I can swim! I told you I could if I wanted to, Boogie! Oh, shit! He started flailing his arms around and looked red in the face and just slightly terrified. But we held him up and supported him, and he quickly started to dog's paddle back to the steps. He climbed on to the landing and stood there dripping water and grinning, elated and victorious. We decided that day that soon Bobby would have to take the initiative test of swimming out to the raft in the middle of the pool. But that's another story.
When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. Oh, the men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home.
The Americans had been in Penzance for about 2 months now, and their presence was really being felt in the town. Wherever you went, you would see groups of laughing giants acting as if they owned the town. And the most common sight was to see a local girl or woman, married or otherwise, clinging on tightly to her American beau, the seams on her newly acquired nylon stockings perfectly straight, and somehow shouting out what she had done to get them. I had overheard my mum admonishing my auntie. "Did I see you out with a Yank last night, Winnie?" "Oh, Beena, don't be so. Everyone's got an American." The gang was up at Albert Terrace practically every day now, and we had eaten more sweets and chewing gum and sometimes even chocolate than we were likely to eat for the rest of our childhood. One particular hot summer's day at the end of May I remember vividly. We were hanging around outside their billet, hoping to catch some more chewing gum, when a jeep drove up, and inside was one of the blonde giants, and sitting beside him was the freshly shorn bald-nut, who had been adopted by the Yanks as a sort of mascot. We could see his scalp shining in the sunlight. We all envied him, because he had access to all sorts of information about the Yanks, and his brother Whippet told us that very often he slept up Albert Terrace all night.